Hi, students. I just had dinner, and now it's later in the day. So if the lighting looks different, that's the reason. So where were we? We had Septimius Severus, and then he did the unfortunate thing of leaving the empire to his two sons, Geta and Caracalla. And when they took power, Caracalla swiftly had his brother Geta exterminated and his sister-in-law, and he took power. He was terrible, and so after 6 years, we assassinated him. Civil War. Now, the Civil War that comes after the death of Caracalla lasts about 50 years. And art historians and historians call this period of time the time of the soldier emperors, because there was this power vacuum, and generals of the Roman army would come in and try to take control. And one after the other, they would take power for like 6 months, and then they would be violently overthrown by another general. And then he would last 8 months, and then he would be violently overthrown by another general. So 50 years of instability in the empire is leading to a even more rapid decline of power. And these power struggles make any kind of basic problems of any empire or any country or any people even more exaggerated or exacerbated. We see an increase in war, which leads to an increase in death, right? Dead bodies, war brings death. Those dead bodies then bring disease into the countrysides. War also destroys the land because these generals are taking their troops, tromping through fields, they're burning crops, they are trying to strategically destroy other generals, but they're also destroying the people of Rome. It's a false idea that the collapse of Rome is due to outside invasion. There were definitely tensions along the borders of the empire, but to completely blame invasion as the downfall of Rome is so false. In truth, it was a steady decline of power and control within the empire that the bordering adversaries took advantage of. One that I'm thinking of specifically that often gets the blame are the Germanic tribes in Europe. That is not the case. The case is that these Germanic tribes were being hired by the Romans as mercenaries as they started to kill off their own soldiers or send them to problematic areas around the empire. Germanic tribesmen were being hired into the empire. They were being hired in to be soldiers because Caracalla had promised that any man who served as a soldier in the Roman Empire would immediately receive the benefits of Roman citizenship. And so for a lot of these young men in the Germanic tribal areas, that was a great solution. Also, as the power of Rome began to decline, it began to shrink. And so territory that used to be occupied by Romans was now open, and people would simply settle in this previous plot of Roman farmland because the Romans were too busy trying to maintain some kind of interior power that they weren't paying attention, or they couldn't pay attention or focus their efforts on the exterior boundaries of the empire. Oh, there's so much more we could talk about. I'm getting distracted. Email me if you want to know more about the collapse of Rome. I emphasize this collapse and this 50-year period of chaos because one general will rise to the top and become a stable force for the Roman Empire. His name is Diocletian, and he was a Roman general. He was from this area of the empire where it is now like modern day Bosnia. And he establishes himself as the emperor of Rome, and he immediately divides it into a tetrarchy. What? Okay. Look at here on this image, this slide. The Roman Empire's tetrarchy. In 284 CE, Emperor Diocletian sets up a new method of rule. He's reorganizing the empire. He's reorganizing its political and economic functions. This tetrarchy is a rule by 4. So rather than 1 or 2 rulers, Diocletian sets up 4, and that's where we get this word tetrarchy. Tetra is 4, archy is power. So when we say the Roman Empire's tetrarchy, it is the power of 4. Now this map here is showing you the 4 major areas. But before we look at them as individual areas, here, this is the best I can do without a whiteboard to show you how Diocletian organizes his empire. He first realizes that it's impossible for 1 man or 2 men to control this massive space. And so he divides it into 2, an Eastern and a Western empire. Okay, so we got 2 major parts, East and West. Within the East and the West, he further divides it into a North and a South. And these divisions of territory are based on lines of, or are based on elements in consideration to raw materials, population, and their economic stability. And so ideally, the North and the South, the East and the West will be equal. They have been divided into equal parts, maybe not in the amount of territory, but what that territory can then bring to the empire for its support. Does that make sense? So we got an East Roman Empire and a West Roman Empire. And within that, there is a North and a South. Got it? That's our 4. He then, Diocletian, sets up each side, the East and the West, with its own 2 leaders. If you notice here, let's look first at the Eastern Empire. In the East, he sets up an Augustus and a Caesar. In the West, he sets up an Augustus and a Caesar. These names, which were our first Julius Caesar and Augustus, Octavian as Augustus, have now been carried through over 200 years in the empire to mean a ruler. Many of these emperors will take on the names of Caesar and Augustus within their title. So the name Julius Caesar and the name Augustus have now become titles. And for Diocletian, he is saying that the Augustus and the Caesar will rule an Eastern Roman Empire, and an Augustus and a Caesar will rule the Western Roman Empire. Within that, and I wish I hadn't erased it, but let me pull it back up again. Within that, Diocletian says that the Augustus is the elder, number 1, and that the Caesar is beneath or subordinate to the Augustus. There's a first in command and a second in command. Diocletian sees this as a way of ensuring a mentorship, that the Augustus will be older, more experienced, more wise, and the Caesar will learn from the Augustus. And then when the Augustus dies or gives up or abdicates, then the Caesar will inherit the role of Augustus and appoint a new Caesar. So we learn from the Augustus to the Caesar, who will then come into place and assign a new Caesar. It sounds like a good plan, right? Diocletian's got this new thing going on, and he sets himself up as an Augustus in the east. So he takes control of this portion. He has under him a Caesar, and then in the west, he appoints an Augustus and a Caesar. And again, the idea is that they will all co-rule the empire together and then mainly focus in on maintaining their smaller, more manageable areas of the empire. Each of the rulers, each Caesar and each Auguste, will also have their own main capital. So let's look here. For Diocletian, as Augustus, he sets up a capital in Nicomedia. His Caesar has a capital here in Cyrenaium. In the west, the Caesar takes control of an area called Trier. And what? The capital of the Augustan West is in Milan, not in Rome. This is a big deal. The capital of the Roman Empire is no longer in Rome. Why? Practicality. It is still the symbolic center or birthplace of the empire. In fact, it gets the nickname as the navel or the belly button of the empire. But it is no longer helpful to have your ruler stationed in the city of Rome because it's so far away from all that needs to be maintained. If you notice here, these capitals are closer to this difficult border. Nicomedia, while it's not close to any eastern border, it is the site of a well-traveled trade route. That's where the money's at. And I want to emphasize, as I have in the past, the east is where the money's at. In Rome, or I should say, in the Roman Empire, there are bigger, more wealthy cities and citizens in the east than there are in the west. There is more cash flow. There is more grandeur. There's more history. I mean, it's got Egypt. It's got Syria. Mesopotamia is right there. So it has more prestige. And so then it shouldn't be a surprise that Diocletian, who is technically from this area of the empire, would choose to set himself up in the east. East is where the money's at. And he wants to be with the stability and the grandeur of the East. Rome, it's a great city, but the surrounding territory in comparison to the East, the big cities are few and far between. You know, it's a lot of countryside. The East has these beautiful palaces, these long exotic roads that lead off to the far east of China and India and Persia. Oh, the West, it's got Rome. And then what else? So Diocletian sets up the Tetrarchy. Our next artwork is going to be focused on this Tetrarchy and is going to be reflective of the leadership of the Tetrarchy.